secret to share with you. What we're going to do for the next hour is we are going to talk about what your employees are doing while you are here. Josh and I are going to pull back the curtain behind and show you what's behind the scenes of what your employees are not telling you. Some of it may amaze you in a positive way. You may be thrilled. Some of it not so much. Just remember we're the messengers. The goal of our session, that your best performers are hacking you, is that an hour from now, we leave here better prepared to be the CLOs of the 21st century. Norm did a great job of summarizing technology's march onward. That's a good preface for where we're going. We're going to pick it up, and we're going to tell you what your employees are doing with that technology, unsanctioned by you, and that maybe you might want to start leading from behind. So, to get things started, as Mike said, we're going to be doing an interactive conversation, but let's do some pre-work for that conversation. What I'd like to do is show you just a 3-minute video about some of the things we found from the workforce's perspective.
Hacking work. The time is now. Share your hacks with the world. Hacking work is forbidden innovation. It is the act of getting what you need to do your best by exploiting loopholes and creating workarounds. Hacking work is getting the system to work for you, not just the other way around, making it easier to do great work. Why hack? Our tools have become more bossy than our bosses. Even though businesses spend $1.5 trillion on info technology, the tools we have outside of work are leapfrogging past the ones we use on the job. When a 12-year-old can gather information faster, process it better, and get volunteer guidance from better sources than you can at work, how can you pretend you're competitive? You can't. What can you do? Start hacking. Compared with what's available outside of work, corporate supply tools and processes reduce your personal productivity by 30% to 75%. Poll. Who gets the most attention paid to simplifying things for them? 85% said senior executives. And who gets the least attention paid to simplifying things for them? 87% says the workforce. There's no tracking of all the costs that corporate-centered processes offload onto us. Hacking as a positive force for change has come of age. Downsides are rare. Your house is 6 times more likely to be hit by lightning than you are to be fired for hacking benevolently. Share this video with everyone you know. Share your hacks with the world. One employee funded all his projects by selling on eBay corporate trash that was supposed to be thrown away. One new hire told HR, "Here, this is how you will evaluate me," and got away with it. You can too. One team jumps over the firewall constantly, presenting the results to senior executives as if they used only the company-sanctioned tools. One manager got her budget approved by posting her customers' complaints on YouTube. Benevolent hacking is the duct tape of the work world. It fixes every poorly designed and corporate-centered procedure, tool, rule, and process. Why are managers hacking? Less than 1/4, 23%, get the coaching or training they need when they step into their new role. Why are workers hacking to cut through the clutter? Information inside companies is doubling every 550 days. The average worker receives 325 pages of information every day and uses only about 5 pages. Nobody's out to get you, but the system is holding you back and diminishing your contributions. This is why hackers hack. Since the Industrial Revolution, we've relied on our employers to provide the tools we needed. Their tools, not ours. Their limits, not ours. All that is changing. Our tools are now as powerful as the companies. The new measure that matters. How easy is it for me to do great work?
So this video was done by a 15-year-old girl that we met at a conference. Just to give you an idea of what the workforce is up to today. So that's all some entertaining hand-waving, right? I mean, we all know there's a lot of change, but this makes it sound really dire, right? Well, in the research that we did, we found that, and we've interviewed literally thousands of people, we found that between 1/3 and 2/3 of all your employees are doing things like this right now. So when we told you, we'd tell you what they're doing while you're here, that's it. So this is unfortunate that it's happening, but it's something that we've all gotta grapple with now, right? To give you an idea of how and why this happens, one person that we interviewed works at a company much like many of yours, I'm sure. They have software installed that forbids the employees from going to YouTube or Twitter or Facebook and whatnot, which, you know, I assume we all agree with is probably a good idea, right? I mean, watching videos of cats flushing the toilet's not helping the bottom line. Well, what happened is that this guy was doing a training course, and he was talking to some of his peers, and he realized that they weren't really happy with it. It wasn't very polished. They didn't feel like the content was quite on point enough. There weren't enough choices for how they could get the material. So that night, he went home and thought he'd bone up a little bit and Googled around for supplementary material on the content of the course. And he found that YouTube had a whole series of videos about the topic. And they were very well produced. And he thought that they were right on point for what he wanted to learn. And they presented the material in the way that he wanted to have it. So the next day, he came into work and he talked to a bunch of his fellow employees. And they said, well, shoot, we should just get that stuff. And they spent half the day busting through the firewall and the rest of the day watching all the videos. Well, they ended up passing the course with flying colors in half the normal time. And the instructor was amazed at how good she'd done her job. And of course, they never enlightened her as to what actually had happened. Well, this sort of stuff is happening all the time. In fact, just before our session, we were in the cafe talking to someone who's doing one of the breakout sessions. And Bill pointed out I should bring this up. I mentioned that I have a friend of mine who works at an agency, basically representing actors and whatnot. And she had taken this job and then discovered that there was software on her machine that monitored every phone call, every email, every web page she was on. And she'd brought a bunch of contacts from her last job that she needed to get to by using Yahoo and whatnot. So she just basically was wildly ineffective and had to start her career over. So I was sitting there chatting with her, and I said, well, here, take this. And I gave her a USB key that let her, she plugged that in her machine, she rebooted her machine, and she had an operating system that was tunneled through to Sweden, so everything she did was completely invisible to her employer. And she said, this is amazing, thank you, Josh, so much. Can you please make another one for one of my good friends who's in a different company? And I said, well, just go download it, you can do it yourself. And she said, oh, no, I'm not a technical person. I can't do that. So I said, well, let me send you a URL. I sent her a web page, and she immediately wrote back and said, you sent me the wrong page. All this page says is download and double click. And I said, well, that's how you do it. So these are the kind of tools that we have. And the result is that you've got employees who expect to be able to go out online, find all kinds of materials that are hyper-personalized, that are extremely content-specific for what they want, and are usable in whatever format they like. And if you're not satisfying that demand, they're going to get it somewhere else. And there's no feeling of guilt. Why would they feel guilty? They're just learning to do their job. So this is where we're at today. Bill?
So what we want to talk to you about is there's no debate about whether or not this is happening. These hacks are happening all throughout your organizations. One of the ones we didn't mention in the book was actually another training session where one of the trainers said to her boss, my training sucks because I don't have the right budgets. And her bosses said, tough, deal with it. So she went to her trainees and said, my training sucks because I don't have the budget. Here are 5 websites that give you the information I'm supposed to be giving to you for free. Go get it for free. I'll test you, and you never had to take this course. And they all passed with better grades than they normally would have. So what we want to do now, for about 15, 20 minutes, is just have a conversation with 350 of our closest friends. We've got handheld mics around. If you want to just shout out, go ahead, and we'll repeat the question for the video. But we want to know not whether, there's no debate here. We're not going to entertain a discussion about whether this is happening or not. This is invisible, and it is happening. Deal with it. Life's tough, get a helmet, deal with it. What we want to know is, why is this happening? Can you see why it's happening? Who is the problem? Who owns it? Let's talk about this. Let's have an aha about an underground that's finally out in the open, coming out of the closet. We've got a couple people with mics. What do you guys think? Yes?
We own it.
Who owns it?
Every employee owns it. Every employee is part of the problem. We're part of that problem.
So just for the video, just repeating, we all own it, every one of us owns it.
We're all part of the problem.
Anybody else want to contradict that, say something different, chime in?
You all agree? Crickets.
Question is, how do we change it?
Say again? We agree.
We agree?
Well, so if you all are responsible for it, what do you have to do about it? I mean, why does the problem still exist?
Yeah. Why it's 1:45. Why haven't you fixed it yet?
The Abilene paradox.
What's the Abilene paradox?
That's where we all sit and accept something because no one.
We've got a mic, so we don't have to repeat it.
The Abilene paradox is a paradigm where we all accept and go along for the ride because nobody takes the individual or personal effort to change or make a difference. In many cases, we don't want to stand out. Group dynamics will always pull people in to be a part of the group. To change things, more often than not, you have to separate from the masses to change what we all go along with.
So you got to put your head on the block.
You do.
So, now is the time to put your head on the block and speak up. This is a safe environment to speak up. Talk to us. What do we need to be doing differently?
Any ideas?
First we got somebody here with a mic, then Mike over there. Go ahead.
Hi, David Lamb. I think we need to stop trying to control what it is that our folks do and figure out how to enable them to do things that are productive and contribute to the success of the organization.
You mean we should let them go on social networks and say all sorts of bad stuff about our company, and that's okay with us?
I know our senior execs and many folks have legitimate concerns about that because of the brand, concerns of brand, and some things that have happened that are very negative. But there are also a lot of things that happen very positively, and if we think about it and prepare for it and assist, put tools in place that allow people to leverage not just their intellectual capital, but the capital of them and all of their associates, there's really a gold mine that we can mine effectively.
Well, an interesting statement about that is, one, you've got to enable these people to do it, and two, it can really hit the fan if you do, right? Just to identify what Mike said when we started out, you're the guys who are stuck between the employees who need training and are telling you they need something different, and the folks at the top who say lower budget, faster results. I mean, you guys have all heard the song before. It puts you in a tough spot, yeah?
Yeah, but it depends on your leadership. I mean, if you have traditional conservative leadership that have been successful because of the way they've done things and want to continue down that path, you have to honor that, but kind of jump over the fence and jump back and push that line forward a bit. Mm-hmm. If you have enlightened management that's innovative and that are technology savvy and see and understand the benefit of moving in that direction, then the job is easier, but it's still quite a journey for us to take.
Do we have a...
Yeah, way in the back. Thank you.
Caroline Avey. In terms of it being a problem, I think, first of all, we have to take a look and see, is it a problem? It might create legal issues, it might create compliance issues, but I don't know if it is a problem.
Okay, what would you say all this hacking is? Is it a force for good? Is it?
I do think it's a force for good. The examples that you gave, there were good outcomes from it. And I think sometimes when we try to constrain things, it makes it worse almost. Whereas if we embrace it, it can be for the better.
By the way, you're not supposed to agree with us too quickly. We're supposed to be the evil empire here, and you're supposed to be treating us as Darth Vader. But go ahead. Other comments? Who else? A hand in the middle and a hand over here.
If we look at how we all learn now in the things that are non-work related, it's easy. You get a new thing, a new toy at Christmas, you can figure out how to use it in 5 minutes. It doesn't take you all day to build it. It doesn't take you all day to turn it on. And so our expectations as an individual, as a user, as a learner, are to be able to do things quickly. And now in an enterprise-wide scenario, it's harder. We all know the reasons why, but as a user, we really don't care. Like, I'm responsible for it at work, but as a user, I'm still awfully intolerant as a learner. And so we've got to balance the expectations we're all living through outside of work, where things are easy, and challenge ourselves to say, how do we make it easier, even though we know the lead time is hard and the cost is high and all of those things that make it difficult to change what we're doing. We can't just say we have to do it that way because that's how we did it before. So it's our problem because we're all awfully intolerant. And it's our problem because we need to figure out how to make it simpler and easier in an enterprise-wide scenario, whereas on an individual basis it's much simpler. But those people who made it easier for us as a consumer, it wasn't a simple problem for them to solve either.
Good point. I have a friend of mine who recently changed jobs, and at his new company he has to deal with SharePoint. And me and some buddies were out at a bar with him, and he was saying, yeah, my new company uses SharePoint. We all groaned and smacked our heads. He said, no, that's okay. I haven't had a chance to break it yet.
So who else? Just raise your hand. Who's got mics?
We've got one over here with a mic.
We've got one with a mic. If we can get a mic over here.
My dilemma is, how do we speak to our corporate IS department? Because I feel they're the ones that instill the fear in our senior leaders to say viruses, worms, whatever. So we can all appreciate, from a development and a learning standpoint, giving access. But then there's that, I'm sorry to say for any IS professionals, that black cloud of IS, that we struggle with. And how do we articulate that message to them? So, it's not kind of this fear environment with allowing people to have access.
Well, you do have an edge because you're a lot more charming than the IS department. There was one over here.
The question in terms of access and efficacy versus control. I mean, we were just at Disney 2 days ago, and quite frankly, it was quite boring for our kids, whereas they have a lot of fun on the beach here with no rules. And, there is a need for safety. I don't want them going out in the middle of the ocean, which they're not going to do because they're not idiots. And, our employees aren't idiots either. So you got to treat them like people who have a brain in their head.
Well said. And by the way, Disneyland's a lot more fun if you get in the employee-only tunnels. It's a good spot.
Our hacker will tell you how to do that later. Who else has a mic? Everybody watch. There's 2 mic runners and lots of hands, so just...
I have a mic here, so I've got the power. My name's Gary Woodill. One of the best hacks that I think we could all agree on recently was landing that plane in the Hudson River.
Yes.
It wasn't in the training manual. And if we contrast it with another plane crash, a sad one, which was Swissair 111 in 1998 off of Nova Scotia, smoke came in the cockpit, and the captain ordered the co-pilot to break out the manual and read what he should do, instead of landing the plane as fast as they could down into Halifax. So there's a good example of doing training manual versus you hack it because you have to. So I think we have to address the issue of what's forcing employees to hack. It's because things are new, different, and they haven't seen that problem before.
And even more interestingly, it turns out the pilot that landed in the Hudson, a bunch of his fans set up a Facebook page for him, so of course now a bunch of people dug up a lot of info. Turns out he's an enormous safety nerd. He's a really big geek. Like he wrote books on the topic, right? Well,
let's make a point about that to make it clear. We've got John Russell here who confirmed the fact. This guy was a trained fighter pilot. He went through the most structured training that you can go through, and you didn't deviate at all. You learned to follow a checklist, and what he did was went through emergency protocol. He had done it, he had practiced it, he had been trained on it, and he knew how to do it. And I want to be the first one to say that I think you've got a good point, but you shouldn't override it. There is a structure in all large organizations, there's a thing called bureaucracy. Okay? And the reason you do that is when you're running a large organization, you want to have some way to predict what behavior will be in outlying organization. And there is, when we were all going through the concept of empowerment, that I happen to believe in totally, empowerment is not the equivalent of anarchy. So if you're in a small organization, you can have a lot less discipline. The issue here in the discussion, which I think is very, very important, is how do you build structure while at the same time creating an environment for people to be innovative. And that was a point that I tried to make last night. I believe we can build and develop innovative culture. But it doesn't mean that everyone is a free agent every morning that they come to work. So it's how do you balance? How do you balance and create islands for innovation and make that a part of your culture so people are not afraid to experiment and try new things?
Absolutely. And I would echo the point that part of what you want is a way to anticipate what change is coming, right? You're SOL, folks. Sorry.
So we got a few more minutes. Let's try and get as many comments as we can.
Just a quick point, because I do believe that the point that Frank made is absolutely right. You have to have that balance. But the observation I've spent a lot of time in technology that I've made lately is the new generation coming into these large companies, they have no problem with alignment to management's goals. But they have been brought up with social networking and technologies that scream on-demand consumption of information and data, and they have truly bought into the fact that their network is not just those that they work with and live in their town. They're global citizens. They don't see those boundaries. So if we want to attract those that think innovation, but align them with the direction of a company that needs bureaucracy, we need to embrace the technology and the way they communicate. Doesn't mean that you change the topics they need to study, learn, etc., but you give them options to consume it the way that they feel they want to consume it. And that is not easy, because it means that you have to deliver the same message in a number of different ways so that they feel they're part of they choose how to consume it and internalize it. That's what I believe.
Either that or let them express it in the right way.
So I just had one point. I don't think we can really control.
We see your hands so we can see where you are. Okay.
So I don't think we can really control what people are going to access and what people cannot. I use it all the time. I have in all my organizations. I use a lot of internet to get the information that I need. And being from the learning organization, we cannot control it. I think our goal should really be to make sure that we help the organization align towards the goals that are relevant to the organization. And if our employees are going to get information from other sources that is good, let's just celebrate that and create a framework that is necessary to make sure that there are no legal issues around some of the other industries like financial or pharmaceuticals. But other than that, I think we just need to celebrate it, create a framework. We can't control that. There are a lot of open source tools. There's a lot of information out there which are cheap, free, and they work.
Great points.
Right.
Others? So several hands. Anybody? You've got two hands there.
I have a microphone here.
So let me see your hands so we know where you are.
Oh.
Okay.
So we keep talking about the controlling of it, and I think preparing for it and controlling it are what causes the hacks in the first place. And so if you look at a couple of things, one is Domino's Pizza, where their customers kept saying that their pizza sucked, and they ended up going out and responding to it in a really innovative way, and they've used it as a huge brand opportunity. And if there's a great book called Stumbling on Happiness that talks about what really makes us happy, even though we think other things make us happy. And one of the things they talked about is they brought a group in and they shock them as part of joining the organization. And some they gave a really minor shock, and some they gave a huge shock to. And they found out afterwards that the people they gave the huge shock to and then brought them into this great organization were happier than the ones that had the minor shock. So taking, I think it is learning how to deal and respond to whatever it is that comes your way, instead of trying to create a whole lot of preparatory control frameworks and things.
We'll be outside with cattle prods after this.
We got time for a couple more?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got somebody way in the back. If we can get a mic right there.
Yeah, I've got a mic. I think it's interesting that you...
Hand, please, so we know.
Yeah,
or
I
just
did.
stand up.
Yeah. That you posed it as who is the problem, because that takes you down a whole line of thinking versus what is the problem. And so, I'd like to tether that, that perhaps part of the problem is competing philosophies, and not necessarily a person that you can point to as much as competing philosophies. So on the one hand, you have this big movement for Six Sigma and efficiencies to be gained through process and so on. And on the other, the very need to reinvent those things through hacking. And so I think there's this, how do you balance those two inside organizations? You don't necessarily have to point to people as the problem as much as pointing to how do you handle that dilemma, so to speak, of creating efficiency while yet continuously improving. So,
who's got?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the challenge sometimes is
we need to wrap.
Really have to let the individual, make their own path and give them the tools.
And by the way, you might want to Google hacking Six Sigma. It has some interesting results.
If I could just make one observation.
Please.
That sometimes I think the problem is we got the problem wrong. Instead of asking what is the problem or who is the problem, we ought to be saying what is the opportunity.
Absolutely.
And looking at it from that perspective, because that frames how you go about solving it or dealing with that issue, and it also impacts who you bring in to help deal with that issue.
Okay, we got time for one more. Somebody has a mic somewhere?
I have a mic over here.
Okay.
Probably don't need one. I'm Tina Boyda from Silk Road, and I'd just like to make note that I think it's possible. I think I work for a company that, our CEO's motto is, you're an adult, act like it. And, we had 50 people, and we're now, close to 500. And I feel like because that's been ingrained in our culture, and our managers believe in it, and our CEOs not only believe in it, but show it every day and reward innovation, I feel like it works really well for us. And so I don't think it's impossible, but it's a lot of hard work. So, just a little mini case study for you.
Well, thank you all for participating in that. And what you just summarized was actually a lot of what we found when we interviewed the workforce. If you'll allow me just 2 bullets out of all the comments we just heard, 2 ways to summarize. In the back, we heard maybe it's competing philosophies or conflicting philosophies. And in the middle, we also heard something about balance. I'd like to take those 2 together and help refine that as a point of corporate-centered, user-centered. We do need to balance those 2. Right now, the balance is about 99.99999 corporate-centered and 0.0001 user or learner-centered. We are not proposing anarchy, even though you'll see that word on one of our slides shortly. What we are proposing that we need to correct the balance. This automatically shifts into, yeah, but what about? It's a balance. This whole invisible world of hacks is only invisible because you're refusing to talk about it. It's there. It's huge. So it's the core idea behind what we just heard and what we hear from audiences around the world are we're way too corporate-centered. We need to be much more user-centered, just like any consumer product would be. And the other thing, we heard both the words and the ideas. When Josh and I were writing this book, 3 core ideas popped up as to why hacking work is happening and why your learning systems suck. They have nothing to do with learning. We heard the 3 words already: power, control, risk. We need to start having this conversation with honesty and integrity. That's really what the issues are. They're not about learning. They're not about too much empowerment. They're not about good employees going rogue on us with access to social networks. It all comes down to, as it has throughout human history, power, control, risk. We need to have an open and honest conversation about those 3 things. Josh, shift it over to you now.
Right. So we've talked about a lot of the problems. We've talked about the fact that we all know that those are problems. So what's actually working? The good news in all of this is that getting involved in social media, getting involved in new models of training, et cetera, you're going to have the next few days to speak to some really, really smart people and hear some really interesting things about how to actually do this. We want to give you a little kick in the rear and get you out there, recognizing that it's not so bad. You can actually do this. So a couple examples that we got by interviewing some folks from different companies that I think are particularly relevant in that these companies were very successful with new models. One of them is Zappos. You all know Zappos, the online shoe store? Okay. So the CEO, Tony Hsieh, likes to say that Zappos is not a shoe store, it's a customer service store that happens to sell shoes, which is an interesting perspective to have. One of the things that's interesting about Zappos is that when you come on as an employee, you spend 2 weeks training. Now, whether you come in as the new mailroom guy or you come in as the new CMO, you go through the same training, and that includes answering phone calls, doing tech support, picking shoes in the warehouse, stuffing envelopes, the whole 9 yards, all the way up to hanging out in the CEO's office. Every employee does this. The upshot is that you're a lot more empathetic to those guys that are working out in the warehouse, but also you understand how the whole thing works, right? Which is pretty important. Well, the other thing they do that's really interesting is after your 2 weeks of training are up, they offer you 2 weeks of salary to quit, which seems a little crazy, right? Why would you train someone and then give them money to quit? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense because the people that leave are the people that wouldn't have been good employees. And the people that stay are the people who really give a dang. They care. They want to be a part of it. They believe in the company culture. And that's a good way to start a new job. Another example is Best Buy. Again, I'm assuming you guys all know Best Buy. They're the ones that crushed Circuit City. And part of how they managed to do this was through the efforts of a friend of ours, a guy named Gary Keeling. Some years back, Gary Keeling was working on a task force to figure out why it was that all the corporate mandates were not being followed by the guys who wore the blue shirts. And the guys who wore the blue shirts were the ones that actually were on the floor in the stores selling things to customers. Well, midway through this big day-long meeting that he was a part of, he realized that no one there had actually worked on the floor. They'd never really been in the stores, done work in the stores. And he thought, well, that might be part of the problem, so just spitballing here, why don't we put up a wiki, which is a web page that anyone can edit, and ask them what's wrong. And he got laughed out of the room, because who wants to encourage your employees to complain, right? Well, that weekend, he and another employee decided that this needed to happen. It was important. So they sunk their own money into setting up a wiki. They called it Blue Shirt Nation. And 3 or 4 months later, 3/4 of the entire organization was on the wiki. And sure, they were complaining, but they also were setting up a database of common customer questions and answers. They were putting up diagrams for how to reorganize the store so that impulse buy items were nearer to the cash register. They were identifying inefficiencies in the supply chain that people in headquarters would never know about because the only way you could see it is if you were dealing with it with your own 2 hands. And as a result, Best Buy became wildly much more efficient and very, very successful. These weren't earth-shattering revelations that they had. These were just small new policies that made a big difference.
Before we go further, quick housekeeping comment. We're referring to some stories. We're talking about some references and resources you might want to try. If you go to the description on the CLO agenda and you go to the description of our talk, at the very bottom of it, you'll see download references and links. We've got about a couple dozen different links and tools and resources that some of which we'll be talking about, some of which are even beyond what we're talking about. But everything is there. So anything we mention, if you don't see a link up there, just go to the agenda and you'll find it. What we're really talking about, the real challenge we're facing is a mind shift. We need to start thinking of this differently. If I was to, as we heard from several comments when we were just beginning, if I was to propose doing some things, giving the workforce some empowerment, you know, you'd be raising your hand, screaming at me, oh my God, you know, anarchy, the whole world will end, cats and dogs raining down, oh, it'd be terrible. No. As long as you frame it as corporate-centered and learner-centered need to be balanced. And what's happening in the outside world out there, there's far more freedom to consumers and citizens. And by the way, 100% of your workforce are consumers. 100% of your workforce are empowered citizens and family members that are using social media with complete freedom. So what's happening is they're seeing total freedom out there, total handcuffs in here. We need to create a more balanced world in here. We need to start learning from the best practices out there. So what we would ask you to do is start looking, where are the best things that I can learn from that are not in corporate America, that won't be featured necessarily at a CLO summit? Where can we learn from? Here are a few. If you haven't already, how many know of or have visited the website Khan Academy? Now, can everybody raise their hands? Look at how few hands are raised up. This is a guy who Bill Gates proclaimed as a world-class educator, and he thinks he's one of the best educators out there. Salman Khan was a trader, a guy that made money playing with money, and one of his cousins needed an algebra lesson. So he went into a closet, and he made a little video booth out of a closet. And he started making videos. And again, by the way, housekeeping note, all these things, go to the download links. All these things have links under our agenda. Salman Khan went out and he just started producing for family videos. And it became so viral. To date, he's produced over 2,000 videos and was featured at the most recent, a month ago, TED conference as one of the world's class educators. And how many? We had a handful raising our hands. What does that tell about us? We're too introspective. We need to get out in the world and start looking at models that are out there. What Khan was doing led to and he's just creating videos for education. He's a normal citizen become an educator. That led to TED launching TED Ed, which is a new initiative. Again, if you go to the link we've given you access to, you'll see that there's a global initiative for anybody creating videos, teaching videos for anybody. They've gotten the whole world teaching each other. Now, if out there the rules are anybody can teach anybody, and in here I must have a certified trainer that goes through, who is your workforce going to be paying attention to? Another one. Wael Gonion, Google executive who helped launch everything that happened in Egypt. I'd like you to go to his link, watch his video talking about it. Some of it may scare you if you think of bringing it inside the company. Oh, anarchy. If Egypt's leadership was like ours, that means you're proposing taking down our leadership. No. The one thing that I want you to listen for as you look at that video, he says, the power of people to self-organize. Guys, an entire country was taken down by the power of people to self-organize. You don't think that your learners have that power now? They are self-organizing right now. They're doing it without your knowledge. Another place I'd like you to go look at is Atlassian. It's an Australian software company. In August of 2010, not too long ago, the head of global talent announced a 12-month public trial for performance management. He said anybody in the company could trash the way we're doing performance assessments right now, and we're going to rebuild it. We're going to crowdsource performance assessments. So if entire companies are changing the way performance assessments are being done from the bottom up, why aren't we doing training that way? And the last one is Hacking Education. That is an actual 2009 event that happened where it was no children left behind. It was, how do we hack around all the stupid bureaucracy of the states and all the teachers' unions and everybody else? How do we just teach? How do we do great teaching in great ways? So these are some of the breakthroughs that we want you to go out and look outside, that are happening out there. The real innovations that are user-centered are happening out there, not in here.
As an aside, Bill, last week I was in India speaking with Neil Ferguson, who's a relatively well-known historian, and he teaches. And he was complaining about, the time-honored problem of students not being interested in history. And I made some quip about Aristotle in a drunken voice. And he said, "What's that? My students all do that." And I said, "Oh, it's from Drunken History." It's like, "What do you mean Drunken History?" I said, "There's this really popular series on YouTube called Drunken History. Grad students get drunk and tell each other history and record it. And it's really popular." And he said, "All my students do that same voice all the time." Is that what that's from? I'm like, yeah. He's like, no wonder they're not reading their textbooks.
So that's a perfect example of what we're seeing all around the world, is that our students are getting ahead of us. So how can we do that? Yes, there are conversations that need to be had about corporate-centered policies. We can't have, if you work at a drug company, you can't have your entire workforce going on and saying things that the FDA would kill you for. Yes, we understand that. But let's not only have that conversation. Let's have a new conversation about how to build learner-centered training. And here's a basic model for it. The model is one-day design. No longer. To make this real for you, we're now at the end of March. What we would like to propose is that you pick, when you leave here, you pick one pilot program that needs to get launched before mid-year 2011. Something that you can get going fast. And we want you to spend the month between now and the end of April just thinking about it. Who would you get in the room or online to design it well? The design team is probably only, the educational designers, the trainers, the developers, are probably only 1/10 of the population you need to be doing it with. The rest should be actual learners. And the model for this is prep for one day, end of April, pick a pilot program where if you don't get it perfect, it's okay. Prep for the end of April, then just one day, have everybody online reviewing, and they can be in the same room. The way Twitter and Google do this is they might have users in a separate room, but the designers, the developers are all in the same room. So you could have 10, 20 people in the same room. Design it, build it. What would you say if we needed to train you on this? How would it go? And they respond back and forth throughout a day. One day. But the goal is to stop so much R&D up front and back end the R&D. Iterate, iterate, iterate. One day design, whatever it is, build it in one day, and then perfect it day after day after day. Josh, you want to add?
So this is increasingly how companies are getting launched. I know one of the big things a lot of companies talk about is we need more innovation. Well, a lot of the VCs that I talk with are now setting up conferences to get high school kids to come in and work on one-day design projects, and that becomes a company that they then buy. Part of the reason that this is so critical is that you're not going to succeed, right? We all know, I mean, you talked earlier, you want to be able to predict what's coming in the future. Well, unfortunately, one of the only ways you can do that is have some failures. So fail fast, fail often, and fail cheap, right? One day is relatively cheap for a failure. From that, you'll then be able to design to something that's actually worthwhile. Let's jump to the next slide. There are a couple points that I wanted to leave you guys with. Oh, okay, so this is the goal of doing design that way.
Can I jump in on this one?
Yeah.
Going back one, we talked about a mind shift for everybody in this room. If we are successful at anything, we're going to close with giving you some tips, some things to do. But if we are successful with the hour that we spent with you, our goal is really about that head shift, that aha moment. Wow, I never thought of it like that way before. So what we would like to do is challenge the people in this room to actually learner usage of whatever you build for them is more important than the R&D phase. That's what matters most in the iterations. So really, the real mind shift that's happening that leaves this conference, this summit, is from now on, excuse me, our role is to learn more from the learners than they learn from us. Now that doesn't in no way reduces or diminishes the critical role of training and development, and it has for the development of everybody else. But we're going to amp up how much time do we spend actually learning how people learn. And not in textbooks, not in theories, not from gurus, but actually watching people use our training and development sessions. That's the real breakthrough that we need to see. And everybody out there that does this in the business world, Twitter, Google, this is how they develop things. They rapid prototype something, and then they spend time watching the people who use it. Josh?
Right. So let's skip ahead of this one, because it's depressing. So let's leave you guys with some things to think about. We have a few recommendations, and obviously you're going to get your heads stuffed with loads and loads of recommendations over the next couple days, so we get first shot. The first one, something that we found to be enormously effective, is something that I'm sure everyone intends to do, and all too few people actually do, and that's the old axiom, eat your own dog food. I'm familiar with this from the software industry, but I've heard it used in all kinds of industries. Basically what it means is, if you're developing something, whether it be a process, a program, an application, you need to use it yourself, which is terrible, because anyone who's ever had to find out their own failures by using it themselves will tell you it's no fun. But it's enormously helpful, because it's the only way you can correct those problems before you go to your users, and your users show you a whole set of new problems that you couldn't have anticipated. It's critical, and it happens far, far too rarely. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what we'd recommend is that you implement a new organizational measure. And it's qualitative, but you need to be asking this question regularly and charting how you're doing against it. And that is, go to your employees and ask them, how easy are we making it for you to do great work? And there's two elements of this which are really critical. One is, yes, they're going to complain, which is fine. That's what you want. You want to figure out what's not working for them. What is between them and great work? The second part, which is perhaps more critical, is you're getting them to think about their jobs in terms of excellence. What do you mean great work? We're not talking about satisfactory minimum requirements. We're not talking about hitting the clock at 5 o'clock, not 4:45. We're talking about great work. And when you start asking employees about their jobs in those terms, they start thinking about it in those terms. And then you can collaborate with them on doing something truly excellent, which is new. Bill, you had some points?
Actually, before I go on to the last 2 points, just focusing on two sets of words there, easy and great work. Let's just unpack those from the corporate-centered, user-centered perspective. From now on, what we're asking you to do is measure ease of use from a learner-centered perspective. And this also rolls up to corporate productivity and efficiency. The easier you make it for somebody to learn and apply what they learn, the quickly you are efficient and effective. Great work is also learner-centered as well as corporate-centered. Corporate-centered, it's whatever your mission, vision, values, goals are. But it's also user-centered and learner-centered. What is my view of great work? And will I get a chance to do that? Josh gave you points 1 and 2. I'll close with 3 and 4. We already mentioned crowdsourcing. As a next step, what we'd like to ask you to do is within 1 month, go pilot something that is designed from the bottom up. There are lots of other stories we can share with you. We don't have time, but there's lots of great things happening out there. Josh mentioned Best Buy and a couple others. Design from the bottom up. By the end of April, have a 1-day design session where your workforce are designing your training. And by the way, if you guys think, oh, my structure is so hierarchical, I could never do that. The US Army is doing this for their field manuals. The field manuals are the Bibles of how things are done on the field. There are some field manuals that they retain corporate or command structure control over that the work population, the soldiers don't get to touch. But there are others where knowledge in the field matters even more than the people that were trained at West Point, and they are getting to crowdsource the field manuals. So you need to decide what is appropriate for crowdsourcing. Not everything is, but definitely do it. By the end of April, do something. And the last thing we would ask you to do is download one of the links we provide you. It's called Building Simpler Companies. This is based on 20 years of research looking at everything from the workforce's perspective. There are 6 critical user-centered measures that will make the difference in how your learning and your performance management and everything else is adopted. 6 measures, I won't go through all of them now, but I'll give you a hint. The worst one that corporations do is only 14% favorable. The measure is, how well does this company respect my time? It is only 14% favorable. That's a big problem because the biggest asset that we have now is not benefits and not money, it's time and attention. And this is where people are getting more and more concerned about themselves and less concerned with the company if you're not respecting their time and you make them sit through a day-long session where a half hour could do just as well. So those are the next steps. Josh, what do we want to send them out with?
Well, so at this point, we've tried to scare you a little bit, although it sounds like you all were pretty scared when you came in. But also to introduce you to the fact that this is stuff that you can actually do. There are small changes you can do that can have a very large effect, and there's a lot of pretty radical stuff that you, if you are with enlightened leadership, can go ahead and bring back to your companies to implement. And we're excited to entertain questions. We'll be around during the break, and go get them.
So, and one thing I would add is, whoever heard of a presenter ending early? They usually have so much stuff to say, they're going to talk your ears off. We got about 5 minutes left. We're going to end, rather than do massive Q&A, we'll be around until the next session happens. One number I want to share with you that is probably the most important number in business that is never discussed. It is the number 1,440. Every single one of you experienced it today. Every single one of your employees experienced it today. Anybody know what that number is? 1,440. It is the number of minutes in a day. And why it's so important is more of your learners and more of your best performers are making decisions based on, geez, it's almost 2:30 and I have to pick up my kid for soccer. How the hell am I going to do this? Yet we have a 3-hour meeting. Can you fit that in 3 minutes, please? Time is crucial. So what we want you to know as we send you out of here is you can do this if you are willing to be the proxy for the workforce and start being learner-centered. Go do this. Thanks.